Charleston evenings had a way of wrapping the skyline in soft gold and fading blue. The rooftop glowed with string lights and the hum of laughter. A jazz trio played softly in the background while waiters moved between tables, carrying trays of champagne and canapés. I stood near the edge of the rooftop, drink in hand, looking out over the harbor, watching the last light disappear behind the Ravenel Bridge. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, my wife's birthday. Emily. 38 today. We'd been through a lot together, 10 years of building, struggling, surviving. I thought this was one of those nights where everything we'd fought for would feel worth it. Then she raised her glass. Her smile was practiced, perfect. She tapped the side of her wine glass gently. The room quieted. I just want to thank someone who's been there for me, believed in me, and pushed me when I wanted to give up, she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. And then she looked at him, Tyler. Thank you, for everything. The applause came before the confusion settled. I didn't speak. Didn't make a scene. I walked over, took back the small velvet box I had given her minutes earlier, the engraved pendant inside untouched, and left. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than betrayal. If this hit you in the gut like it did me, drop a 1 in the comments. Let's talk. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that hit where it hurts, but heal just the same. And hey, share this with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might be living their own version of this story. Joshua had always been the quiet type, the kind of man who didn't speak unless there was meaning behind the words. He built homes, but more than that, he built stability. Structure. He was 42 now, a seasoned architect in Charleston, known for restoring historic homes with the kind of patience that most men lost in their 30s. 10 years ago, when he met Emily, she was a whirlwind, bright, beautiful, ambitious in a way that made the air around her feel electric. She was 28 then, already carving her space in the chaotic world of social media strategy. Her charm was undeniable, her mind sharp. While Joshua lived in blueprints and clean lines, Emily thrived in color, in motion, in buzz. They met at a nonprofit fundraiser, both volunteering, him helping design a pop-up pavilion, her running the campaign that brought in donations. The first time she touched his arm mid-conversation, he felt something shift. She was everything he wasn't, and for a while, that made them feel invincible. Together, they believed they could weather anything. And they almost did. The first major blow came 5 years into their marriage, a failed business investment that left them near bankrupt. Joshua had tried to save a boutique firm by personally guaranteeing a loan. When the firm folded, they lost nearly everything. Emily could have left then. Most would have. But she didn't. Instead, she moved in closer, brought her laptop into the kitchen, and built a freelance business on top of their dining table while he quietly worked 2 jobs to keep the mortgage from collapsing on them. It was survival, not romantic, not glamorous, but it was theirs. Then came the miscarriage. Their first and only pregnancy, gone just as they were beginning to believe they deserved something good. It changed them both, but in different ways. Emily threw herself into work, chasing clients and campaigns, booking flights to conferences with people who spoke her language. Joshua grieved in silence, burying himself in floor plans and client meetings, trying to hold together a house that suddenly felt too quiet. The grief didn't split them in a loud, dramatic way, it just rearranged the furniture of their marriage. They stopped eating dinner at the same table. The "how's your day?" questions faded into vague, one-word answers. There was no fight, no slam of the door, just a slow, steady drift. When Emily's business started taking off, Joshua celebrated her wins more than she did. He gave up a senior partner promotion at a top Charleston firm to stay local so she wouldn't have to relocate her growing agency. He convinced himself it was a fair trade, her rise, his route. He designed her home office with the same care he gave to his high-end clients, even naming her company's brand palette after the colors of the sunrise she liked to watch from their porch. He didn't need applause. He just needed to believe they were still building something together. But somewhere along the way, their shared dream quietly split into 2 parallel lives. He noticed how often she checked her phone at dinner. How her smiles became increasingly reserved for Instagram stories. He excused it, justified it. She's stressed, he told himself. This lunch means everything to her. He stopped asking about her day, mostly because he wasn't sure she'd answer. Emily had become someone who belonged to the world, clients, followers, screens, and Joshua? He'd become a man in the background. Still providing, still loyal, still believing that love meant staying even when you felt invisible. The truth was, the structure of their marriage looked beautiful from the outside. But like an old historic home with perfect paint and crumbling beams beneath, their foundation was quietly rotting, inch by inch. And neither of them had the courage, or maybe the energy, to acknowledge the cracks. Joshua kept building. She kept running. Neither of them noticed they were no longer looking in the same direction. Until one night, under string lights and champagne flutes, she thanked someone else for helping her get where she was. And suddenly, everything Joshua had built felt like it had been made of sand. The rooftop was glowing. It wasn't just the string lights delicately draped across the beams or the flicker of candlelight catching in wine glasses, it was the way everything shimmered with curated perfection. The venue overlooked Charleston's harbor, a private space Emily had booked months in advance. The evening air carried that early spring warmth that makes people linger longer, talk softer. Jazz hummed from a live trio in the corner, and the waiters floated through the crowd like dancers, offering oysters and rose. Emily was radiant, her fitted navy dress hugged her like it was tailored by God himself, her laughter crisp, practiced, and just loud enough to be heard from across the room. People adored her, and tonight, she glided through them like a queen, accepting compliments with humble grace, making mental notes of who brought which gift. Joshua stood near the bar, holding a lowball glass of neat bourbon, watching her work the room. He smiled when she looked his way, but she didn't notice. It wasn't the first time she didn't notice. He wasn't bitter, at least not yet. Just observant. He'd arrived early, helped set up the centerpieces, made sure the music was at the exact volume she liked. He'd even asked the staff to keep her favorite champagne chilled and hidden until the right moment. He'd spent hours designing her birthday gift, a silver pendant etched with the coordinates of the cliffside spot in Ireland where she once told him, breathless and shivering from the wind, that she knew he was home. He'd paired it with a handwritten note folded into a small envelope. In it, he wrote, "For every place we've been, and every place we haven't yet dreamed." When it was time for the toast, Emily gently clinked her fork against her glass, drawing all eyes to her. The crowd hushed as she stepped forward, smile poised, voice confident. "First, thank you all for coming. I feel so loved, so supported," she began, making eye contact with friends, clients, her sister, even the caterer. "This year's been transformational. And it wouldn't have been possible without someone who stood by me through every decision, every breakdown, every success." She paused, and Joshua felt a quiet, private smile form at the edge of his lips. He thought she was about to thank him. After everything they'd endured, the bankruptcy, the loss, the rebuilding, this was the moment where they'd come full circle. "Tyler," she said, turning toward the back of the room. "You believed in me when I wasn't sure I could believe in myself. You've pushed me, protected me, and made me better." The silence was deafening. Joshua didn't move. Didn't blink. Around him, people exchanged glances, not the obvious kind, just small, instinctive flickers. A cough. The sound of a fork clinking against a plate. Tyler, standing near the back in a tailored blazer, gave a sheepish nod, then raised his glass with a knowing smile. Emily grinned at him, wide and effortless. Joshua felt something sharp tighten in his chest, not quite pain, not quite fury. Just a collapse. Not of pride. Not of ego. Something deeper. Something foundational. He set his glass down slowly, wiped his palm on his slacks, and walked toward her with calm precision. She looked at him briefly as he approached, a flicker of confusion passing across her face, followed by a polite half-smile, like she was surprised he was still standing there. He didn't say a word. He reached into his blazer, pulled out the small black box, opened it just enough for her to see the pendant inside, then closed it again. He held it in his palm for half a second longer, enough time for her eyes to widen, just barely, and then he turned, placed it on the edge of the dessert table, and walked out. No slammed doors. No raised voice. Just the soft sound of his shoes against the polished wood floor and the hush that followed him like a trailing shadow. As he stepped into the Charleston night, the humidity hit him like a second skin. The bourbon sat heavy in his stomach. He kept walking, down the staircase, past the valet, through the crowd of late-night diners laughing beneath patio lights. His car was a block away. He didn't rush. Every step felt deliberate, weighted. Somewhere above him, the jazz picked up again, laughter resumed, and the party continued as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something irreparable. The kind of thing you don't recover from with an apology or a phone call the next morning. He'd seen the look in her eyes, the absence. The choice. And in that moment, walking through the streets of a city he once built dreams inside, Joshua realized he wasn't just leaving a party. He was leaving the version of himself that stayed for people who had already turned the page without him. It was 3 days later when Joshua opened her laptop. It wasn't snooping, at least that's what he told himself. She had gone out for drinks with the girls, a phrase that had started to feel more like a smokescreen than a social life. Her charger had died, and she'd asked him to email a file to a client she was late responding to. The file name was forgettable, brand launch _deck, but when he clicked on her cloud drive, a folder caught his eye. It wasn't the name that raised suspicion. It was the timing. Last accessed 2 days ago. A folder tucked inside another, labeled innocuously enough, personal. He hesitated. Maybe it was just planning documents. Mood boards. Her journaling. But curiosity sharpened into something darker, heavier. His hand moved without permission. Inside, the first thing he saw was a picture, Emily in a red dress, one he'd never seen before, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. The timestamp was from 6 months ago. His pulse spiked. That couldn't be right. She had told him she was in New York for a branding summit. That week, he remembered it with excruciating clarity, because it was the same week he buried his father. She had called him before the funeral, said she couldn't get out of meetings, promised she'd light a candle in her hotel room. She cried on the phone. He'd believed her. His eyes scanned the folder, pulse rising with each scroll. Dozens of photos. Her and Tyler at sidewalk cafes, walking arm in arm along the Seine, wine glasses clinking against candlelight. Receipts from boutique hotels, dinner for two at Michelin-star restaurants. A selfie from their room, bathrobes matching. Messages, "You make me feel like the woman I used to be," she'd written. "I wish I'd met you first." Another, "He'll never understand what this is. I'm tired of pretending." Joshua closed the laptop and just sat there. The silence of the room turned into a scream in his chest. For a while, he couldn't move. Couldn't even blink. There was a ringing in his ears, a throbbing pressure in his skull. He felt it before he fully understood it. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't a mistake. This was intention. Premeditation. She'd crafted an entirely separate life. While he was giving eulogies and shaking the hands of distant cousins with swollen eyes and a hollow heart, she was falling in love under Parisian skylines with another man. He staggered into the kitchen, grabbing the edge of the counter like it might keep him from collapsing. Everything started to unravel, memories flickering through him like a film reel on fire. The sudden disinterest in sex. The way she'd started locking her phone. The missed calls, the dry love US muttered over her shoulder. All of it had been there, signs flashing in neon, and he'd chalked it up to stress, to grief, to the hard years. He thought love was patience. Thought loyalty would carry them. But he was wrong. So damn wrong. It wasn't rage that came next. Not at first. It was disbelief. Like maybe the pictures were fake. Maybe they were old. Maybe she was helping a friend. But the timeline lined up too perfectly. The Paris trip, the brand launch, the emotional distance, it all pointed to one irrefutable truth. He wasn't part of her plan. Not anymore. Maybe not for a long time. Joshua sank into the chair at their kitchen island, the same spot where he'd once surprised her with anniversary cupcakes, where she used to sip coffee while reading pitches aloud, asking for his advice. The same island where he'd sat alone after his father died, waiting for her to fly home, wondering what kind of woman misses her husband's grief and says, "I'll make it up to you," like it was just a forgotten errand. And now he knew. She didn't forget. She left. She had chosen Tyler, chosen him in every way that mattered, and Joshua had been nothing more than the man she hadn't yet figured out how to leave. The weight of it crashed into him like a wrecking ball. He pressed his palms to his face and let out a sound that didn't feel human. Not quite a sob, not quite a scream. It was grief, but not for her. For the version of himself that believed he was enough. For the version of them that he thought still existed. For the man who bent over backward to hold on to a ghost. And in that moment, beneath the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock they'd bought on their honeymoon in Rome, Joshua finally saw the truth. She hadn't just cheated on him. She'd made a choice to build a new future. One he was never meant to be part of. The message came 2 days later. Just a simple, almost cowardly, "Hey, you around? Can we talk?" Joshua stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply button for a long moment. Marcus. His best friend since undergrad, the guy who stood next to him at his wedding, who helped him paint the nursery that never got used. The one person he'd confided in during those long, sleepless nights after the miscarriage, after his dad passed. If there was anyone he thought would never keep something from him, it was Marcus. But the text came with the weight of someone who already knew he'd crossed a line. They met at a small bar off King Street, the kind of dimly lit place where truth tends to surface because everyone's too tired to lie anymore. Marcus was already at a back booth when Joshua arrived, a whiskey glass in front of him, untouched. When Joshua sat down, neither spoke for a minute. Marcus looked like hell, hair unkempt, dark bags under his eyes, fingers twitching as they traced the rim of his glass. Joshua didn't speak. He wanted to see what Marcus would lead with. What kind of liar he'd choose to be. "I saw them," Marcus said finally, barely above a whisper. "At the Indigo. A few weeks before the party." Joshua didn't flinch. He just stared, his expression unreadable. "They were together," Marcus continued, voice cracking. "I didn't catch them doing anything, but it wasn't innocent." She was holding his hand across the table. Smiling in a way I haven't seen her smile in years. And him, he looked like he knew he won. Joshua closed his eyes briefly, something behind his ribs pulling tight. "I didn't know how to tell you," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "God, Josh, I didn't know how. I told myself maybe I misunderstood. That maybe it was a one-time thing. And then I told myself it wasn't my business. But mostly, I was scared." "You weren't scared for me," Joshua said quietly. "You were scared of being the messenger. Scared of being the one who ruined what was left of my life." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence said more than words. "And it gets worse," Joshua said, leaning back slowly. "You remember Tyler? You should. He was one of my clients 4 years ago. That lake house out in Hilton Head. The one we customized from the ground up. I pulled strings to get him permits. Slashed design fees so he could stay within budget. Spent weekends walking that damn lot with him. He called me his architect brother. Turns out he took that a little too literally." Marcus's eyes widened. "Jesus Christ." Joshua shook his head, letting out a bitter chuckle. "This isn't just personal, Marcus. This isn't just my wife. This is a man I brought into my circle. A man I helped build a future for, who used that foundation to dig under mine." "I'm sorry," Marcus said again, softer now. "I should have told you. You deserve that." "No," Joshua said, voice low, steady. I deserved better than all of this. They sat in silence for a while. The bar noise around them felt like a distant hum, irrelevant. Joshua sipped his drink, letting the burn settle into his throat, giving the rage somewhere to go. He wasn't a violent man. Never had been. But the temptation to shatter something, anything, was becoming harder to ignore. You know what's crazy, he said finally. It's not just Emily. Or Tyler. Or even you. It's the whole illusion. The idea that loyalty guarantees loyalty. That if you keep your promises, so will the people you love. But that's not how life works. You don't get points for being faithful. You just get left behind slower. Marcus looked like he wanted to say something, offer comfort, ask for redemption, but he didn't. Maybe he knew better. Maybe he finally understood that some friendships fracture cleanly, like glass, while others split jagged and slow, like bone. I wasn't trying to betray you, he said, voice raw. But you did, Joshua replied, not harshly, just honestly. By staying silent, you chose her lies over my truth. Maybe you didn't mean to, but that doesn't change what it cost. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he drained his glass. What happens now? Joshua stood up, throwing a 20 on the table. Now, he said, looking down at the man who had once been his brother in everything but blood. Now I start building something that can't be stolen. He walked out into the Charleston night without another word, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft click. He didn't feel lighter. Just clearer. And clarity was enough, for now. Because in that moment, Joshua knew that trust wasn't something you could tape back together. It was a currency, and his had been spent too freely. From here on out, he'd be saving it for himself. The box sat in the back of the hallway closet, beneath winter coats and a stack of old client blueprints he never got around to archiving. Joshua hadn't opened it in years, didn't need to. It was full of receipts, contracts, spreadsheets, old notes from when he first launched his architecture firm. He pulled it out now with a sense of purpose, the kind that comes when you finally stop running from a suspicion and start walking toward a truth. The folder he was looking for was labeled Family Transfers, Q4. It was from 2 years ago, when Emily was just starting her business. He remembered the conversation clearly. She was struggling to find a private investor, and the banks weren't giving her the time of day. She sat across from him one night, eyes red from frustration, asking if there was anything he could do, any way he could float her until she got on her feet. He remembered what she said almost word for word, just a small amount, Josh. You always talk about how your firm runs with extra buffer. I'll pay it back the minute I land my first 3 clients. Of course he said yes. He moved money from his overflow accounts, the cushion he used to pay seasonal freelancers, to front material costs when clients were late, to cover surprise licensing fees. He labeled it temporary partner investment, never even documented it in full because he trusted her. Because he believed that her success would be their success. Now, sitting in his home office with old ledgers spread out before him and her laptop logged into their shared business suite, Joshua began cross-referencing dates. Client payments from his firm went out in December. 3 weeks later, Emily's company website launched. A brand reveal video went live. She had professional headshots taken. Hired 2 assistants. Booked a full-page ad in a regional business magazine. None of this had been cheap. At first, he thought maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe she'd used her own savings. But the more he read, the more obvious it became, the launch was funded almost entirely from resources he had quietly, generously offered. Not a loan. Not an investment. Just the kind of blind support you give when you believe in someone more than you believe in protecting yourself. And then he saw it. In a tucked-away document labeled Equity Update, dated 6 months after launch. He opened the PDF and felt the blood rush from his face. 2 names were listed under ownership structure. Emily, and Tyler. Co-founder. Not consultant. Not silent investor. Co-founder. His jaw clenched as he stared at the page. He could feel the rage rising, but it wasn't hot. It wasn't volcanic. It was cold. Icy. The kind of anger that doesn't make you want to break things, it makes you want to bury them. He closed the laptop slowly, leaned back in his chair, and let out a long, controlled breath. This wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't even just betrayal. It was theft. Strategic. Methodical. She had used him as a launchpad. Built her empire with his bricks. Then handed half of it to another man. He stood up and walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and drank it slowly, deliberately. In his mind, he replayed all the moments she'd thanked him with half-smiles and tired kisses. The night she said she was too busy to talk, but thanked him for understanding. Every "just one more month," every "I promise I'll pay it back," now sounded like rehearsed lines from a play he didn't know he was auditioning for. She'd built a life with another man using the pieces he gave her. Every foundation, every first client, every campaign, backed by his silent sacrifices. And she hadn't even looked back. Not once. He walked into their shared living room and scanned the space. The throw pillows she picked. The minimalist shelves he installed by hand. The framed quote above the fireplace that read, "Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can." He almost laughed. He had started with trust. She'd used what he had. And now she was doing what she could, with someone else. Joshua didn't break down this time. He didn't scream, didn't throw the laptop or shatter the glass in his hand. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. He began writing. Not an email. Not a message to her. But a list. A plan. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming. Reclaiming his time. His focus. His energy. His money. Reclaiming the man he had been before he gave everything to someone who only ever saw him as a stepping stone. Because now it was clear, this wasn't an emotional decision on her part. It was calculated. Deliberate. Tyler didn't just replace him in bed, he replaced him in business, in legacy. And the part that hurt the most wasn't that she cheated. It was that she did it with his tools, on his soil, while looking him in the eye and asking for just a little more support. Joshua set his glass down. Picked up his old company blueprint and stared at the slogan printed at the top, "Built to last." He smiled for the first time in days. Because now, he wasn't the man who got used. He was the man about to rebuild from the ruins. And this time, not a single brick would be handed to anyone else. He left Charleston just after sunrise. No dramatic exit, no boxes packed in the back of a pickup truck. Just one duffel bag, his laptop, and the quiet hum of tires rolling northbound on I-26. He didn't leave a note, didn't tell Marcus, didn't answer Emily's sudden string of texts that came days too late and miles too far. Charleston wasn't just a city anymore, it was a mausoleum filled with memories that no longer belonged to him. The buildings he once designed, the restaurants they used to frequent, even the cobblestone streets they walked hand in hand, each corner held a ghost. And Joshua was tired of living among them. He settled in a small cabin just outside Asheville, tucked into the hills, surrounded by nothing but trees, wind, and silence. It wasn't much, a single bedroom, a wood-burning stove, a creaky porch, but it didn't need to be. For the first time in years, his space didn't feel borrowed or shared or compromised. It was entirely his. The first few nights were restless. The kind of insomnia that has less to do with discomfort and more to do with an overstimulated mind trying to exhale after holding its breath for far too long. But slowly, the quiet began to settle in his bones. He started running again. Long, solitary runs through winding forest trails at dawn, his breath puffing clouds into the cold mountain air. With every mile, the noise in his head began to dim. The sharp thoughts, the burning questions, the rage, it all melted into the rhythm of his feet pounding the dirt. Some mornings he ran until his legs gave out and he collapsed onto the cool grass with nothing left but breath and sweat and a strange, welcome emptiness. In the evenings, he journaled. Not in the structured way he used to document job site notes or client briefs, but in sprawling, messy handwriting that spilled across pages like a confession. He wrote about the party, the toast, the pendant, the lies, the silence afterward. But he also wrote about the years that came before, the dinners cooked after long days, the inside jokes, the miscarriage they never really talked about. That loss had cracked them both wide open, and neither had known how to rebuild. He wrote about how Emily cried alone in the bathroom and how he buried himself in work because he thought holding everything together meant staying quiet. He hadn't realized until now how much guilt he still carried from those days. Not for the grief itself, but for believing that love meant pretending everything was fine. One night, after writing for hours, he opened his laptop and created a blog. An anonymous space. No name. No photos. Just a title, The Man Left Behind. He posted pieces of his story in fragments. Some entries were only a paragraph. Others stretched for pages. He didn't try to be poetic. He didn't filter his anger. He didn't sugarcoat the humiliation. But he also didn't make himself the victim. He just told the truth, raw, imperfect, human. To his surprise, people started reading. Quietly at first. A few comments. Then emails. Then long messages from strangers, men, women, even couples, who saw their own heartbreak in his words. They didn't ask him to fix anything. They just thanked him for saying what they couldn't. His inbox became a strange kind of sanctuary, a reminder that while pain may feel isolating, it rarely is. 2 weeks into his time in Asheville, he got a message from his sister, Layla. They hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since the miscarriage, when a harsh comment during a heated conversation drove them apart. He had said she didn't understand grief. She had said he was pushing everyone away. They were both right and both wrong. The message was short, "If you're ready to talk, I am too." He invited her up. She arrived on a Saturday, wearing a hoodie that smelled like the same detergent their mother used growing up. They hugged on the porch, the kind of embrace that says more than an apology ever could. That night, they sat on the cabin floor eating takeout and talking for hours. When he told her everything, she didn't gasp. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just looked at him and said, "You've spent your whole life building everyone else's dreams. But what about yours?" That line hit like a punch and stayed lodged in his chest for days. He started drawing again, not for clients, not for contracts, but for himself. Sketches of treehouses, minimalist hideaways, urban renovation projects with character and soul. He filled notebook after notebook with ideas he never had time to explore back in Charleston. And with each drawing, the spark he thought was lost forever began to flicker back to life. He found a local co-op of independent builders and creators who shared ideas in a converted warehouse once a week. He didn't tell them his name. Didn't mention Charleston. He just brought his designs and listened. One day, someone said, "Whoever drew this thinks in layers. This is someone who's built pain into purpose." That night, he walked home with something he hadn't felt in months, hope. Not the blind kind that waits for someone else to come back. But the solid, grounded kind that comes from realizing you've already survived the worst, and everything after is just rebuilding. He was still angry sometimes. Still had moments where he thought about Emily, about Tyler, about Marcus. Still dreamed about the night on the rooftop. But those thoughts didn't own him anymore. They passed through, like weather, and left him standing. It took weeks before he finally updated the About section on his blog. He didn't put his name. Just one line, "I'm not just the man left behind. I'm the man who kept walking." And somehow, that felt like enough. For now. Because he wasn't finished. Not even close. He'd stopped living for validation. He'd started creating for peace. And every sketch, every sentence, every step forward wasn't about getting revenge or proving someone wrong. It was about finally proving himself right. The email came late one night while Joshua sat on the cabin porch, sketchpad in his lap, coffee growing cold beside him. It was from a design association he hadn't thought about in months, an invitation to be the closing keynote speaker at a national conference in Atlanta. The theme, architecture as storytelling. His first instinct was to decline. He'd spent the last few months shedding every part of his old identity, stripping himself down to the bare bones of who he really was beneath the roles. But the more he read the email, the more something stirred in him, not ambition, not revenge. Just timing. And maybe, purpose. He accepted. 3 weeks later, he walked into the ballroom of a luxury hotel, sharply dressed but still carrying the quiet weight of the man he had become. He didn't stay in the green room. Didn't mingle with other presenters. He simply waited in the wings, watching the rotation of polished speakers give sleek presentations about innovation, sustainability, and spatial efficiency. Their words were well-rehearsed, their slides immaculate. But as he stood behind the curtain, he felt none of it. Just a stillness that came from knowing he didn't have a script. He had a story. When they called his name, applause rose politely, but it didn't swell until after he stepped on stage. And that's when he saw them. Front row. Emily. Tyler. Sitting side by side. Her hair perfect, his posture smug. She didn't expect him to show. That much was clear in her expression, eyes slightly too wide, a frozen smile masking the panic behind it. He walked to the podium, adjusted the mic, and paused for a moment that stretched long enough to make the room lean in. Sometimes, he began, his voice calm, clear, the people you build the world for, will burn your foundation down. Silence. Then he smiled, not bitterly, not dramatically, just with a quiet strength, and continued. I came into this industry because I believed in the permanence of things. The idea that if you laid the groundwork right, poured the slab, aligned the beams, what you built would stand the test of time. I applied that logic to my work. My business. My marriage. My friendships. I believed that consistency was currency. That if I just kept building, the people I loved would stay. He let that hang there. But what I learned is that sometimes, what you're building isn't shared. Sometimes, while you're laying brick, someone else is drawing exit plans. Quietly. Carefully. And you won't even know you're being replaced until the final wall goes up and you realize the door doesn't open for you anymore. The room was dead still. Every eye fixed on him. Even Tyler had stopped smirking. This isn't a story about bitterness, Joshua said. It's about clarity. It's about learning that when someone uses your tools, your time, your heart, and then hands the keys to someone else, your job isn't to chase what was stolen. It's to rebuild. Smarter. Stronger. Alone, if you have to. A few people nodded. Then a few more. Then applause, low and scattered at first, until it swelled into something that filled the room like thunder. Joshua didn't show slides. Didn't sell a brand. He just told the truth. He spoke for 20 minutes, unfiltered, unapologetic. He told them about blind loyalty. About watching someone turn your sacrifices into their empire. About how easy it is to mistake silence for strength until one day, you find your voice not in anger, but in survival. When he finished, the room rose in a standing ovation that shook the chandeliers. But he didn't wait for it to die down. He stepped off the stage, walked calmly past the front row, never glancing at Emily or Tyler. He didn't need to. The fallout had already begun. Later, he'd hear whispers. That several of Tyler's investors had pulled out before lunch. That Emily's business had lost a major contract the next morning after her name began surfacing in online forums connected to his blog. He didn't post anything himself. Never named names. But stories have a way of finding light when the truth is undeniable. He didn't stay for the after-party. Didn't answer the calls that came in that night. He was already in his car, heading back to Asheville, windows down, wind pulling at his sleeves like freedom. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt finished. Because closure doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it's just the quiet click of a door behind you, the sound of your own footsteps moving in the right direction. Finally, he didn't go back to Charleston. Not for closure. Not for confrontation. He didn't need the apology that would never come or the explanations that would only bruise what had already scarred over. Some stories don't need second acts, they just need to end so something new can begin. And Joshua had already stepped into that new chapter, not with fanfare or fury, but with quiet resolve. He didn't chase revenge. He didn't fire back. He didn't torch what was left behind. He simply let it go. Because sometimes the real act of strength isn't in striking back, it's in not allowing the people who broke you to write your next sentence. Instead of waiting for someone else to validate his worth, he began thanking himself. Thanking himself for waking up every morning when all he wanted to do was disappear. For running until his lungs burned instead of drowning in the weight of what they'd done to him. For putting pen to paper when the silence in his cabin felt louder than any betrayal. For finding peace not in someone else's arms or someone else's approval, but in the stillness that followed grief. She had publicly thanked another man. So Joshua privately, quietly, powerfully began to thank himself for not breaking. His home now wasn't a house filled with shared furniture or monogrammed towels. It wasn't defined by who occupied the bed beside him. His home lived in his spine, in his breath, in the steadiness of his steps forward. He built it brick by brick through forgiveness, solitude, and self-respect. And unlike the one before, this home was unshakable, because no one else had the blueprint but him. The mornings in Asheville grew warmer. The air thinner. The runs longer. One Saturday, he drove back to the coast, not to Charleston, but just outside the city where the sky opened wider and the world felt still. At dawn, he parked near the Ravenel Bridge. Laced up his shoes. Stretched in the cool air. And then he ran. His feet hit the pavement with quiet rhythm, his breath forming clouds in the early light. As the sun crested over the water, it painted everything in gold, the cables of the bridge, the tips of the waves, even the faint outline of the city skyline in the distance. He didn't run fast. He didn't run to escape. He ran because his body had learned that movement was medicine. That progress didn't have to roar, it could whisper. Midway across the bridge, he stopped. Looked out over the harbor. Hands on his hips. Heart thudding steady. And he smiled. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because he wasn't afraid of the hurt. Because everything they took had become a seed, and from that seed he'd grown into someone new. Someone unshaken. Someone whole. A man reborn, not from fire, not from revenge, but from clarity. And as he turned to finish his run, his thoughts drifted not to her, not to Tyler, not even to the man he used to be, but to the one question that now lived quietly in his soul. If losing everything you thought you needed is what finally brought you back to yourself, was it really a loss at all? Have you ever realized you were just a backup plan in someone else's story? Not the main character. Not even the loyal sidekick. Just a placeholder, reliable, convenient, forgotten the second something shinier walked in? Maybe it was in a look they gave someone else, or in a conversation where your name never came up, or a moment when you suddenly saw the truth behind their carefully practiced smile. Maybe, like Joshua, it didn't hit you all at once. Maybe it arrived slowly, painfully, over months or years, in little ways, until one day you stood there, heart in hand, and realized you'd been holding on to something they'd already let go of. And when that moment hit, what did you do next? Did you shrink? Did you beg for a role in a story that was no longer yours? Or did you stand up, quiet, steady, and walk out of the scene? Because sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do. To leave without burning the room. To walk away with your dignity in one hand and your future in the other. To understand that being replaced doesn't mean being ruined. It means being redirected. So let them thank someone else. Let them rewrite the past, romanticize their escape, polish their version. You thank yourself, for staying soft in a world that tried to harden you, for surviving what was meant to break you, for choosing to rise without needing applause. This isn't just a story about betrayal. This is a story about rebirth. About reclaiming. About remembering that the most unshakable foundation you'll ever build is the one that starts inside of you. Now tell me, when your turning point came, what did you build from the ashes?